In the blistering heat of Desert Ridge, where the sun scorches dreams and silence hides scars, a woman worked alone, unnoticed, her hands steady on tools that kept a base alive. They called her a civilian, a nobody, whispering she didn't belong, until a single tear in her jumpsuit revealed a truth no one was ready for. A tattoo, a broken sword through a skeletal mask, whispered of a war they thought was buried, of a soldier they swore was dead. This is the story of Rowan Hale, a ghost who walked among the living, carrying a past too heavy for metals, too raw for words. Step into her world, where courage doesn't shout, but rebuilds in quiet, and discover what it means to survive when the world writes you off. You shouldn't be touching our gear. Back off, Gwym. Rowan didn't lift her head. Her fingers continued their deliberate motion, guiding the socket wrench in slow, precise circles. She moved like a ghost, silent, steady, immune to the insult that had just been thrown her way. No flinch, no words, just focus. Something shifted in the room like a storm building just below the surface. A tool slipped from someone's grasp and clattered loudly against the concrete floor. A muttered curse followed, but no one moved to pick it up. Instead, a quiet unease settled over the gathered crew, their eyes now drawn to the woman who hadn't taken the hint, who hadn't walked away. And then she stood up. As she rose, her worn jumpsuit caught on a jagged corner of rusted metal. The fabric along her back tore slightly with a sharp rip. It wasn't much, just enough. Just enough to reveal something no one in that room had expected, or was supposed to see. The room froze solid. Ink. Dark, deliberate, and unmistakable. It stretched along the center of her spine, just barely exposed beneath the torn jumpsuit. A symbol that should have been long gone, buried with its wearers. The kind of mark that no living person should carry. Rowan spoke, calm, unshaken. "This is your last warning," she said quietly, voice cutting clean through the silence. "Say that again, and I'll remind you exactly what Crimson 17 did to people who underestimated them." But still, they didn't back down. Not yet, because they didn't believe her. Not really. They still thought she was just a contractor, a glorified mechanic wearing a jumpsuit and an attitude. They hadn't connected the dots. Not yet. But 5 minutes later, when the general walked in, everything changed. The heat out at Desert Ridge didn't just burn, it withered. The sun beat down on the tarmac with merciless precision, leaching every bit of moisture from the air until it felt like breathing through sandpaper. The buzz of generators hummed like warning growls in the distance, only broken now and then by shouted orders or the clanging of steel. No one paid attention to the woman crouched in the far corner of the motor pool, working behind a half-dead Gent 6 unit. She wore a faded tan jumpsuit, the sleeves tied around her waist, a black tank top stained with sweat and grease. To a passerby, she was nothing more than another civilian tech, background noise in a place built on utility. But the way she moved told a different story. Every motion was practiced, economic, intentional. The kind of precision you didn't learn in school or on YouTube. It was the calm muscle memory of someone who'd worked under fire, under pressure, with lives depending on her wiring. Private Granger leaned lazily against a fuel barrel, flipping a socket wrench between his palms as he stared in her direction. He smirked. "Bet you she doesn't even know what a load balancer is," he muttered. Corporal Diaz, toothpick in his mouth, didn't look away. "She probably Googles this crap," he scoffed. "Affirmative action hires. They'll let anyone in a jumpsuit these days. Look at her. Can't even wear it right." "She doesn't talk to anyone," added Luke, the youngest of the bunch. "Never eats with the rest of us. Always working on something. Like she's trying too hard to prove she belongs." Diaz snorted. "Yeah, one of those wannabe war heroes. Probably spent a year guarding a warehouse in Germany. Thinks she's Rambo now." None of their comments fazed her. Rowan continued her work, unfazed. A voltage probe in one hand, a flathead screwdriver in the other. She was deep inside the control panel, the same panel that the three of them had already declared hopelessly fried. Then she did something no one expected. A sharp whistle escaped from somewhere as she manually bridged a cracked capacitor with a bypass wire, then punched in a calibration command. The generator gave a stuttering cough. Then it roared, alive, clean, strong. The unit vibrated with steady power, loud enough to drown their voices and their arrogance all at once. The three soldiers snapped to attention, caught off guard. Then without a word, Rowan sat back on her heels, tugging the damp tank top away from her back to wipe the sweat from her face. The motion twisted her spine just enough to shift the fabric. And then it happened. Ink. Black, sharp, familiar to anyone who knew what to look for. Granger's smirk vanished. Diaz leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What the hell is that? The tattoo was unmistakable now, a crimson sword, snapped clean in half, impaling a skeletal mask, encircled by 4 jagged lightning bolts. It ran down her spine like a scar carved into skin. Not decorative, not stylish. It looked like a warning, like a memory etched in pain. Luke blinked. I've seen that, somewhere, I swear. Granger's voice was low. That's not just some ink, that's military. Diaz took a step closer, the color draining him from his face. No, that's crimson. Crimson team. Luke's water bottle slipped from his hand and rolled away. You mean that ghost unit? The one that got wiped in Al-Hudra? People say it's a rumor, Diaz said, his voice unsteady. But my cousin was in Scops. He said they had sealed files tighter than Fort Knox. That team wasn't supposed to exist. But that symbol, that's them. Behind them, Rowan stood slowly. She didn't acknowledge the growing crowd gathering at the mouth of the bay. She didn't need to. She knew. By the time she walked out, the air was thicker than the heat. Conversations dried up when she passed. Nobody stared with curiosity anymore. It was recognition, apprehension, fear. Her tattoo had already made the rounds. Somehow, in less than 10 minutes, a blurred photo of her back had shown up on the battalion's internal thread. Captioned with just 3 words, "Spinal sigil confirmed." Below that, the thread lit up. That's Crimson 17. This isn't a drill. They were all declared KIA in 2011. Only if you believe what CENTCOM puts out. My uncle swore one of them made it out alive, and then vanished. That night, the mess hall felt like a morgue. Utensils clinked against metal trays, but voices stayed low, conversations muted. No one sat at the table in the corner, except her. Rowan drank black coffee alone, twin. Her jumpsuit zipped to the collar, the tattoo hidden again. But it was too late. Luke kept glancing her way. Why isn't anyone saying anything to her, he whispered. Diaz replied, barely audible. Because no one wants to be the one who pisses off a dead soldier who came back. Across the base, in an office sealed with armored glass and cold blue monitors that never slept, Major General Thomas Decker stood still. He held a printed still from the security footage in trembling hands. He'd seen it himself, called it in personally, despite his aide insisting it was just another technician. Just another day. But when Decker had spotted her in the generator bay, something primal had seized him. Not just the ink. Her. 13 years ago, Crimson 17 had rolled into a sun-scorched valley in Al-Hudra and vanished. The only thing that came back was a torn badge retrieved by drone, some burnt wreckage, and a report labeled "No Survivors." He hadn't written that report, but he had signed it. Now that same sigil, a broken crimson sword through a skull, wrapped in lightning, stared back at him from the page. His stomach turned. She shouldn't be here, he whispered. His aide looked up. Sir? Decker said nothing. He just kept staring at the image of the woman by the humming generator. The war was over, but somehow a piece of it had survived, and it had walked straight into his command. The tattoo spoke louder than any words could, unspoken, understated, yet unmistakable. It marked her arrival not with ceremony, but with quiet finality. Rowan Hale had come to Desert Ridge. No one greeted her. There was no welcome convoy, no nods from officers, no salute. She arrived with nothing more than a clipboard, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a stamped work order classifying her as a civilian contractor under technical support. No fuss, no story. Her expression was as restrained as the desert itself, unemotional, unwavering. It neither invited curiosity nor warned it away. Her face bore the hardened calm of someone who had endured more sun-scorched horizons than most career soldiers ever would. Crow's feet etched near her eyes told of countless nights beneath open skies filled with grit, in silence. Her dark blonde hair was braided tight, tucked neatly under a weather-worn ball cap. She moved with intention, every step steady but unhurried. Nothing about her presence screamed for attention, and that, ironically, was the most notable thing about her. She blended in so seamlessly, she practically vanished, which in her case was the point. Rowan was assigned to Section C, the most neglected part of the Desert Ridge compound, a dusty maze of obsolete equipment and forgotten storage. Her job description was routine: diagnose, repair, optimize. In civilian lingo, that usually meant basic diagnostics, swapping out parts, and calling it a day. But Rowan wasn't like other contractors. She didn't bring a tablet. She brought a toolkit. Within 72 hours of arrival, she'd rerouted the failing junction box in Sector 3, boosting the backup power grid by 15%. She silenced an alarm that had been glitching for months and resurrected a transmission module everyone else had already tagged as junk. She never bragged, never asked for praise. But people noticed. They just didn't speak to her. It wasn't that Rowan was unpleasant. She simply existed in a zone all her own. In the break room, she took the far seat by the vending machines, sipping bitter black coffee from a paper cup. No sugar, no small talk. She didn't chit-chat, didn't ask questions, and never handed out advice unless prompted directly. In a place where ranks bled into friendships, where camaraderie and chain of command shaped every conversation, Rowan stood apart, not out of arrogance, but out of survival instinct, and that made people uncomfortable. "Who the hell does she think she is?" Private Granger grumbled one afternoon, slamming a wrench on the table harder than necessary as Rowan methodically inspected a secondary circuit box. "She's acting like this place is her personal lab," Corporal Diaz scoffed, tugging his cap lower. "Probably washed out of some aerospace firm and now thinks she's doing charity work fixing our antique hardware." "I heard she asked for this post," said Luke, the youngest among them, more puzzled than critical. "Like, specifically requested Desert Ridge." Diaz laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Then she's nuttier than she looks." "Maybe she's just had it with civilians," Granger added. "Wants to be around real soldiers. Feel the grit and the glory." Luke stared out toward the open hangar, voice low. "That's not what I see. She moves like someone who's already been through a war." A pause settled over them. Even Diaz went quiet for a beat, then chuckled darkly. "Please, what war? Her knees don't even have sand creases." But even Diaz couldn't completely ignore the way she handled live wires. Barehanded, confident. The way she made calls without so much as glancing at a manual. The way her eyes read a fried motherboard like it was a battlefield map only she could see. She had experience, that much was obvious. But the source of that experience? A complete mystery. And mysteries made people nervous. So they filled the void with rumors, jokes, and passive scorn. It was safer that way. Rowan never corrected them. She didn't flinch when Diaz smirked in her direction. She didn't react when Granger accidentally dropped a heavy toolbox inches from her boots. And when her locker was suddenly reassigned to a broken one with no ventilation, she simply relocated without complaint. From the mess hall to the workshop, from the comm station to the generator bay, she moved with the rhythm of a machine, precise, efficient, silent. Every bolt she turned, every board she replaced, every system she brought back from the brink, she did it without applause, without witness. Her competence, her sheer refusal to seek validation, unsettled them more than open defiance ever could. "She hasn't said a damn word," Granger muttered one morning, as he shoved a box of old capacitors off the work table Rowan had quietly claimed the night before. "We've boxed her out of half the workspace. Still nothing." "She's probably logging it all for her contract manager," Diaz sneered. "Bet she's angling to get one of us reprimanded. Paint herself the hero civilian who saved the day." Luke hesitated this time. "Or maybe she's just used to being treated like that." The room went still. That possibility that maybe she'd already endured far worse didn't sit well with them. But it didn't stop the games. Her request for new circuit sheets got mysteriously delayed. Her toolbox was twice relocated without explanation. Someone even poured water into her pouch of voltmeters. Sabotage meant more to insult than to endanger. She never retaliated, never asked who, never filed a report. But the silence had edges they couldn't see. At night, Rowan would sit alone in the barracks lounge, far from the TV, tracing the rim of her ceramic mug with the same steady fingers she used to trace circuits. She stared out at the dark, where wind swept dust against the outer glass, and sometimes the reflection that stared back startled her. Desert Ridge felt too much like Al-Hudra. The same sharp brightness, the same charged air, the same metallic taste of dust and gun oil hanging just faintly in her throat. Except now, there were no call signs, no brothers in arms, no voices on the other end of her radio. Just her, still standing, still breathing, still unacknowledged. When she passed through the motor pool, conversation died down. Some of the mechanics nodded stiffly. Most avoided eye contact. She was tolerated, but never embraced. A spare part that didn't fit, didn't wear the uniform, didn't bleed the right color. Then one afternoon, the silence broke. A clipboard showed up on her bench during her off shift. Just a maintenance log, ordinary at first glance. But scrawled in the corner, in red, clearance level pending verification. Rowan's brow furrowed. It wasn't the restriction itself that bothered her. She'd worked under worse. But where the log originated. It wasn't stamped by the tech department. This came from base admin. She set it aside. Could be routine, could be a system refresh. She'd wait. The next morning, she walked to the calibration room and swiped her badge at the scanner. It blinked red. Restricted area, the automated voice chirped. Rowan tried again, read again. A young sergeant manning the desk shifted uncomfortably. Sorry, ma'am, new system protocol. You'll have to get reauthorized through section security. I've worked in that room or 2 weeks, she said, her voice flat. I know, he replied, but your clearance, it just disappeared. Like, system-wide. She didn't argue. She just turned and left. Later that afternoon, she returned to her toolbox, the one she'd locked the night before. It was unlocked. Nothing had been stolen, nothing broken, but everything had been moved, deliberately. The torque wrench was exactly 2 inches out of place. Her voltmeter had been flipped upside down. Her folder of notes was backward, the cover peeled slightly open. Rowan stood in silence for a moment. Then slowly she exhaled. It wasn't panic, it was certainty. Someone had started digging. Later that same evening, in the comms building tucked along the east corridor of the base, Corporal Diaz stood silently outside the admin room, arms crossed, eyes fixed ahead. He was waiting, calm, patient, calculating. The moment his superior ducked out for a coffee break, Diaz slipped inside. In one fluid motion, he placed a folded envelope onto the desk and walked out without a word. No name on the outside, just a single file inside. Screenshots of Rowan Hale's ID badge, system login timestamps, and a short typed note. Civilian contractor Rowan Hale has bypassed multiple access protocols typically reserved for ex-military personnel. Recommend full verification of service history. Behavior suggests possible impersonation or unsanctioned field activity. Request formal inquiry. Diaz didn't hate her. Not really, but he didn't trust her either. She didn't fit. And worse, she didn't try to. The investigation moved faster than Rowan anticipated. Within 24 hours, she was summoned, politely, yes, but with that razor-edge tone that only military clerks could perfect, to the personnel office in the East Wing. The waiting area was stripped bare, clinical white walls gleaming under fluorescent lights, the desert heat outside doing nothing to warm the air inside. A civilian contractor named Lewis greeted her with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was all fidgety politeness and overly rehearsed phrases. Miss Hale, he said, like he wasn't sure whether it was Miss, Mrs., or maybe something else entirely. We're just syncing up some contractor records today. New database protocols. Total nightmare for everyone. Rowan took the clipboard wordlessly, a basic authorization form. Routine language until she reached the bottom half. Military service history, active duty reserve, never served other. She stared at the options for a long moment. Then deliberately she checked other. When Lewis reviewed the completed form, his eyes darted to hers and back again. Would you mind elaborating? Rowan said nothing. Behind closed doors, her file had already been elevated to more capable hands. The system, the system, like always, displayed exactly what it was designed to display. Rowan Hale, civilian contractor, technical certifications, verified background, clear military record, none. No DD-214, no recorded ranks, deployments, commendations, nothing. She's clean, one officer muttered, tapping the edge of a tablet. Too clean. This reads like a synthetic profile, someone else said. The base commander's assistant frowned. You think she's a plant? Unlikely, but either she's hiding something or someone wiped it. And just like that, the atmosphere around Rowan shifted. At first it was subtle, almost invisible, but it didn't stay that way. Her name vanished from shared task lists. Her access to maintenance bays was quietly revoked. Her vehicle radio tag was deregistered, blocking her from transportation logs. Technicians who used to greet her with casual nods now averted their gaze. Even the old supply clerk, who once shared his sandwich and stories, offered only a curt shrug when she asked about delayed replacement parts. Back-ordered it, bud, he said, eyes fixed on his desk. Rowan didn't argue. She adapted. She brought her own tools, ones the system couldn't track, and began rerouting her repair routes through zones they hadn't thought to lock down yet. If it couldn't be fixed through official channels, she fixed it anyway. Quietly, methodically, alone, and always after hours. But silence over time grows heavy. Even the strongest can feel its weight burrow into their bones, especially inside a system engineered to erase you without ever saying your name. For the second time in her life, Rowan Hale was being erased. Only this time they weren't even pretending otherwise. The desert heat had become vicious, merciless. By mid-morning, temperatures soared past 112 degrees, but that wasn't what had shifted. It was the air, tighter now, pressing in around the compound like the place itself was holding its breath. Rowan moved through it the way she always had. Quiet, efficient, purpose-driven. Sleeves rolled to her elbows. Boots scuffed from honest work. Head down. But the pressure was different now. Tangible. Conversations died when she entered a room. Requested tools never arrived. Her badge triggered warnings at almost every checkpoint, even at areas she'd worked in freely just days before. She didn't flinch, but the compound did. At breakfast, a table of soldiers stood and left when she sat 3 seats away. Outside the mess hall, she found her name slashed off the equipment sign-out sheet, a new name scrawled across it in red ink, not cleared. And near the machine shop, she paused under the vent above her locker. It was making an odd noise, too sharp, too irregular. She tilted her head. A high-pitched whir, then a faint click. The sound of a phone camera. Someone watching. Rowan said nothing. She hadn't said anything in 13 years. But that didn't mean she didn't notice. And she knew it was only a matter of time before someone pushed harder. That push came on a Thursday. A critical generator module near the communications bunker failed again. 3rd time that month. Rowan was assigned to it. No one volunteered to help. She went alone, toolkit in hand, sweat already forming along her collar. The gen power unit was sun-bleached, wires charred and smoking beneath its vent grid. She knelt beside it, unzipped her jumpsuit halfway, tied the sleeves around her waist like always, and went to work. She didn't notice at first, but something felt off. The fabric around her spine was looser than usual, almost tugging. She shifted, reached forward to access a socket, and the zipper slid just a touch farther than it should have. Then it happened. The jumpsuit caught on the edge of the overheated casing and tore. A sharp rip split the back open, and the desert wind slipped in immediately, peeling the fabric aside. There it was, clear, centered, impossible to miss. A tattoo, stark black and red, weathered but deliberate. A sword broken in the center, piercing through a grinning skeletal mask. 4 jagged lightning bolts flared out like claws around it. Diaz saw it first. He'd been walking across the courtyard with Granger and Luke when he caught movement from the generator bay. Just a flash of motion. Rowan adjusting a relay box, her back arched. He stopped, dead in his tracks. "Wait," he muttered. Granger turned. "What?" Diaz raised a hand, eyes narrowing. "Look at her back." Luke followed his gaze and dropped his wrench. The jumpsuit hung open, wind curling it like a flag. The tattoo burned there across her spine like a brand. Diaz swore under his breath. That's not, that can't be, holy. Granger cut himself off. Luke staggered back, his face pale. I saw that in a documentary, just once, a single frame. They called it the Crimson Sigil, said it belonged to some ghost unit. Crimson, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone knew the rest. 17, or something close to it. The number landed like a blow. Corporal Diaz looked like the ground had just shifted beneath him. That unit's not real, he muttered, his voice dry and uncertain. The whole thing was black-lined. Pentagon denied it even existed. Granger, arms crossed, leaned against the bulkhead with a cynical smirk. Yeah, he said, tone clipped and biting. Then why the hell is it tattooed across her spine? Silence. Nobody answered. By the time Rowan stood up, calmly, deliberately, she had already retied the sleeves of her jumpsuit around her waist and wiped the grease from her fingers with a worn rag. No theatrics, no eye contact, but it was enough. The three soldiers had already stepped back instinctively, like they'd glimpsed something from beyond the veil. A ghost they weren't supposed to see. Wide eyes, tight throats. No one spoke, but they'd all seen it. Within 20 minutes, the photo had already surfaced on the internal group chat. Low angle, slightly shaky, but unmistakable. The ink stood out, a fractured sword piercing a skeletal mask with jagged lightning bolts radiating outward like claws. Crimson, black, real. The caption underneath was terse. She's one of them. Then came the flood. No way. I thought Crimson 17 was wiped. Heard there was only one body never recovered. Her? Seriously, what the hell's she doing here? If this is real, how come no one said anything? And finally, buried between memes and rumors, a comment from an account tagged ops.internal. Usually a throwaway tag meant for jokes or urban legends. But this time it hit different. Some ghosts walk among us, and we were never meant to know. Across Desert Ridge, the atmosphere turned again. Only this time it wasn't laced with suspicion. It was gripped by fear. Major General Thomas Decker didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in data, hierarchy, execution, precision. His command style was feared, his records exact, and his office spotless down to the placement of a paperweight. His calendar was tracked in 10-minute increments, and every inspection run was planned to the inch. That afternoon was supposed to be a formality. He'd planned a brief sweep of Desert Ridge, shake some hands, nod at logistics, skim through a half-hearted slideshow about fuel consumption and generator malfunctions. Nothing disruptive, just a show of presence from the brass. The generator bay wasn't even part of the itinerary. But as the convoy slowed near the southern edge of the compound, Decker happened to glance left. His eyes caught a figure kneeling by a gen power unit. A woman, jumpsuit rolled to her waist, cap pulled low, blonde hair tucked underneath, sweat darkening the back of her collar. She stood for a second, readjusting the jumpsuit across her hips, and that's when he saw it. He froze. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. Everything dulled, radio chatter faded, the rumble of the Humvee dissolved. Even the dry desert wind seemed to pause. All that remained in his vision was the tattoo, burned across her spine in stark black and crimson. The fractured blade, the skeletal mask, lightning bolts like claws. He knew that insignia. It wasn't just a mark. It was memory, regret, burial. 13 years. 13 years since Al Hudra. Since Crimson 17 vanished in fire and smoke. Since he signed the No Survivors report. And now there it was, in the flesh, soldering wires on a power grid. Stop the vehicle, he ordered, voice low. The driver hesitated, but the brakes squealed anyway. In the back, his aide shifted forward, confused. Sir? But Decker was already unbuckling, one hand on the window frame, eyes fixed like a scope on the woman who hadn't even looked up. She kept working, utterly unaware that she'd just ripped open a sealed tomb. He wasn't in the desert anymore. He was back there, Al Hudra, choked in dust and drone static, staring at the final feed before blackout. A firestorm swallowing a signal they never recovered. No bodies, no helmet cams, except one, glitched and burned out, and one coded distress, ping they never cracked. And yet, here she was, which meant something had been buried alive. At command headquarters, Decker moved like a man chasing ghosts through concrete. His boots hit the stairs with surgical rhythm as he bypassed protocol checkpoints without even acknowledging the guards. His aide was nearly jogging to keep up, tablet clutched against his chest. "Initiate archive access," Decker barked, stepping into the secure briefing room. "I want a full pull on Crimson 17, everything from 2011 to 2013. No filters, no redactions." The staff sergeant at the terminal hesitated. "Sir, those files are Tier 5 restricted. I signed the damn original clearance," Decker snapped. "That makes me part of the chain. Enter the override." The room tensed. The sergeant, pale, nodded and typed quickly. One by one, screens lit up. Topo maps, infrared overlays, mission logs with thick black blocks of redaction. Then came the names: Cortez, Nugan, Ferris, Lynn, Doors, all listed KIA, until one caught his eye, faded, nearly grayed out. Lieutenant Rowan M. Hale status, MIA, presumed KIA. Last seen, Operation Scimitar, Al-Hudra, 342. Zulu body, unrecovered. Signal, lost. Recovery, operation, denied due to hostile home airspace. Decker leaned closer. Pull her full service record. Buffering, then, error 402, record unavailable. File purged or relocated. He stared at the blinking message. "Who purged her?" I don't know, sir," the sergeant stammered. "No access log, no trace of admin override. It's not supposed to be possible." Decker's jaw locked. "Then pull her contractor file, the one she's using now." A new window popped up. Rowan Hale, civilian engineering contractor. No military history. Background, cleared. Assignment, Desert Ridge. "Bullshit," Decker muttered. He rose slowly, hands planted on the edge of the steel table, eyes caught between two impossibilities. One version of her had died under fire. The other claimed she'd never picked up a rifle. Someone had erased her, scrubbed her clean, but they had missed something. The tattoo. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't even known outside the unit. The symbol, the sword, the mask, the lightning had been designed by Crimson 17. Inked between their shoulders, hidden under armor, a vow of defiance and brotherhood. No outsider would know the spacing, the line work, the angles, and she had it carved into her flesh, which meant she was there, which meant someone had lied. Decker's face hardened. "Find her," he said, quiet and lethal. "No alerts. I want to speak to Rowan Hale, myself." The sergeant nodded, visibly shaken. As the others filed out, Decker remained behind, staring at the flickering personnel image still frozen on the terminal. A younger Rowan, half her face smeared with blood and dirt, eyes bright beneath a cracked helmet. Fierce, unbowed. He'd signed her death certificate, filed her as lost, and now she was back. The question that dug deepest into his gut wasn't how. It was why hadn't she said anything? He found her alone, right where she always seemed to be, behind the mess hall, sitting in the shadow of the storage crates, staring out toward the open desert. He was dropped off quietly at the lower dunes, the sky above painted in bruised strokes of burnt orange as the sun sank low. The air had cooled just enough for silence to take root, settling over everything like fine dust. He walked slowly, a stiffness in one leg betraying old wounds. Shage, shrapnel, maybe both. His uniform hung loose, collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Nothing about his appearance demanded attention or deference, but there was a weight to the way he moved, a gravity that came to a halt the moment he saw her face. "Rowan," he said softly, almost uncertain, like the name itself might vanish into the dry wind if he said it too loud. She didn't turn, her posture didn't shift, but her jaw clenched, tightly, unmistakably. "I thought you were dead," he said again, firmer this time. His voice had aged, frayed at the edges with memory, with guilt, with the kinds of things that never quite heal. "We all did," she answered, still not looking at him. "You saw the footage," he said. "Yeah," she nodded. "We all did." Silence opened between them like a crack in dry earth. Then slowly Rowan turned to him. Her eyes were steady, but not without weight. "You're limping," she said. "Still too proud for a cane. Too damn stubborn to stay retired." Her eyes searched his face and something long buried stirred at the corners of her mouth. Recognition. A name. "Sergeant Keller." He let out a small dry laugh. "Still remember?" "I remember all of them," she replied, quiet but firm. "Even the ones whose bodies we never recovered." Keller didn't answer right away. He just lowered himself slowly onto the bench beside her, knees cracking in protest, and exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for years. The desert stretched ahead of them, wide, quiet, unfeeling. A lizard darted across the sand in a flicker of movement, and still they sat, unspeaking. Then Keller murmured, "You didn't reach out." Rowan didn't respond. 13 years, he said. 13 years we buried ghosts with no names. You could have... No, she cut him off, soft but absolute. "I couldn't." He turned to her, eyes searching her face for something he couldn't name. "Wait, because they told me to disappear," she said, voice low. "After the dust settled, after the fires went out, they told me if I showed my face, it'd raise too many questions. About what went wrong. About who authorized the mission without a proper extraction plan." Keller cursed under his breath. "So they gave you a cover?" "No," Rowan said. "They erased me, and I let them." His shoulders sagged, the weight of that truth settling into him like fresh stone. "They erased you to protect themselves. Not the mission, not us." She didn't reply. "You were the best of us," he said, voice raw now. "And they buried that under silence." She shook her head. "I wasn't the best. I was just the one who lived." Keller's eyes were steady. "You pulled Cortez out of a burning convoy while snipers were still active. You fixed the comms relay when the satellite was jammed. You went into that tunnel breach without blinking, when half of us froze. Don't rewrite your own story, Rowan." She blinked slowly, exhaling through her nose. The wind picked up just enough to sweep a ribbon of sand across the bench between them. "I tried to build a new life," she said finally. "Contract jobs, remote bases, places where people don't ask questions. But it always finds me. The way I move, the way I work, something gives it away." "Because you weren't made for hiding," Keller said. Rowan let out a humorless chuckle. "And yet here I am, fixing generators in the middle of nowhere, until your back gave you away." That coaxed the first real smile from her, faint, reluctant, but genuine. "Damn zipper," Keller muttered, rubbing the small of his back. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the sand dance under the wind. "They'll come now. You know that, right? Decker's seen the mark, probably half the base by now." Rowan nodded slowly. "I know." "So what happens next?" She paused. "I don't know. It's been so long since I was allowed to be myself, to wear my own name." They sat in quiet again, the kind of silence that carried too many memories to speak aloud. Then Keller's voice softened. "You're not the only one." She turned to him. "I've met 3 others over the years, scattered, hiding in plain sight. One runs a climbing gear shop in Idaho. One coaches boxing in El Paso. None of them ever talk, but the way they check every exit, the way they flinch at radios, it says everything." Rowan swallowed hard. "You weren't forgotten," Keller said, "just silenced. There's a difference, Bershrayo." Her throat tightened. "And what the hell am I supposed to do with that now?" He looked her in the eye. Maybe it's time someone spoke." "Really spoke?" she echoed, Besto. "I don't even know what I'd say." Keller stood slowly, letting the desert wind tug at his sleeves in memory. "Start with this," he said. "I was there. I lived. And I remember everything." He paused. "Then remind them, that you did too." The announcement went out early that morning, unremarkable. Just another notice tacked to the board. "Maintenance refresher briefing. All units. Motor pool bay 1. 900 hours. Mandatory." No one raised an eyebrow. These briefings came every few weeks, mostly dull. Dry technical lectures on surge protection, grounding protocols, tool handling, a chance to sip bad coffee and pretend to listen. But something felt different the moment they stepped inside. The projector was already on, casting a soft blue glow on the wall. The benches were clean, really clean. Someone had even swept the floor. At the far end of the bay stood Rowan Hale, clipboard in hand, jumpsuit zipped high, boots polished to a shine no one could recall ever seeing before. Luke nudged Granger. "Why's she running the session?" Granger rolled his eyes. "Command's too cheap to bring in someone with a real uniform." Corporal Diaz didn't speak. He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall near the back, eyes narrowed. When Rowan stepped forward, the murmurs died instantly. She didn't speak right away, just looked across the faces, men and women she'd passed for weeks, been ignored by, mocked by, sabotaged by. Then she clicked the projector remote. The GenPower 9A blueprint illuminated the wall behind her. "We're going to walk through advanced power redistribution protocols," she said, voice steady, even. "Specifically a sequence designed for hot op redeployments. Scenarios where your backup systems have failed and the primary grid is compromised." A few chuckled under their breath. "Most of you will never need this," she continued, "but if you do, you'll want to remember every second." Her tone sliced cleanly through the room. No nonsense, no posturing. She moved through the diagrams with clinical precision, highlighting key choke points, fault zones, emergency bypasses, grounding loops, manual reroutes. Her command of the material was surgical, fluid, and nothing like they'd ever seen. Halfway through, Sergeant Riggs from engineering leaned forward. "That sequence," he said, "it's not in the Army handbook." "No," Rowan replied, "it's not." "Then where?" "It was tested in theater, under fire. Crimson 17 implemented it after we lost 4 men in a convoy blackout." The air stilled. She let the words linger. Granger frowned. "Wait, what did you just say?" Without a word, Rowan reached up and unzipped her collar, just enough to pull it aside. Just enough to reveal the edge of a tattoo, sharp and unmistakable. A jagged lightning bolt. Gasps rippled like static. Diaz stepped forward, slowly. "You're not just a tech." "No," Rowan said quietly, "I'm not." A low murmur spread through the room, soldiers rising to their feet without realizing it. Something had shifted, irreversibly. Rowan remained still, a solitary pillar among a sea of uncertain stares. No one spoke. One sergeant, muscles taut with hesitation, half lifted his comms unit before lowering it again. No one wanted to be the first to call in backup without explicit orders. Her tattoo, once a whisper passed in shadowed corridors, was now visible, undeniable, and alive with unspoken weight. "I didn't come here to hide," Rowan said, voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "But I didn't come here to be found either." Diaz blinked, caught somewhere between disbelief and the first flickers of guilt. Granger looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Luke's face had drained pale, eyes wide with a dawning fear he couldn't yet name. "You were with Crimson -17, Riggs said at last, his voice hushed, almost reverent. "But they said you were all gone. No survivors." Rowan nodded, calm, almost detached. "That's what they wanted you to believe." Before the tension could unwind, the heavy bay doors groaned open. Every head turned. The echo of boots against concrete cut through the air like a gavel falling. Major General Thomas Decker walked in without escort, without ceremony. His face was stone, emotionless but sharp with purpose. His eyes locked onto Rowan and never wavered. Though technically few in the room reported directly to him, everyone instinctively snapped to attention. The air thickened. The room didn't just go quiet, it braced. Rowan didn't move. Decker stepped forward, deliberate, every footfall like a judgment rendered. "You said you weren't here to be found," he said, voice calm but cold. "But I think it's time to stop pretending you're invisible." "I never pretended," Rowan answered. "You did that for me." There was no anger in her tone, just the raw, undeniable truth of someone who had nothing left to fear. Decker stopped a short distance from her. "I signed your death certificate. Your file was locked, your name erased. Now you're standing in front of 50 soldiers, teaching them systems that don't officially exist." They exist where it matters, Rowan replied, her voice low and fierce. In fire, in loss, in memory. A silence spread like wildfire, static and pulsing. Decker turned toward the room. You all want answers. No one spoke. No one dared. He turned back to her, then took a step to the side. It wasn't an order, it was permission. No, it was recognition. Rowan inhaled deeply. Her fingers brushed the upper part of her spine, resting lightly on the tattoo. This wasn't for show, she said. It wasn't about pride or rebellion. It was how we found each other. In the dark, in the smoke, when comms were dead and orders didn't matter. She let her gaze pass over each soldier, eyes steady and unflinching. I was the convoy engineer for Crimson 17. We weren't ghosts, we were soldiers. We bled for objectives no one will ever admit existed. And when the mission collapsed, they didn't just bury our bodies. They buried our names. Stillness. Then a voice, almost inaudible, from Rick's guys in the back. Not anymore. The words settled in the silence like dust, weightless but impossible to ignore. No one moved, no one whispered. They watched Rowan, not as a curiosity, but as someone becoming whole before their eyes. She stood under the weight of 50 stares, neither shrinking nor boasting, just existing, finally, fully. But Decker remained still for another reason. Something in her voice, not her words, not her stance, but the cadence, struck a nerve buried deep in the concrete of his memory. A voice heard once before, in agony and smoke. He took a slow, uncertain step back. Crimson 17, he murmured. Convoy Bravo, third vehicle, Humvee Unit 3A. His voice cracked. His eyes never left hers. You were the one driving the munitions crawler. She nodded once. That's right. Something shifted in his expression. Not shock, but recognition. Something physical, visceral. You crawled through fire to reach me, he said. I did. I was trapped in the MRAP, my leg, shattered, Rowan finished, pinned under the breech frame. His hand reached reflexively to the back of his thigh, to a wound long closed but never forgotten. You cut me out, he said, almost dazed, with wire cutters, while bullets were still flying. I dislocated your hip to get you free. You passed out before I dragged you to the trench. The room froze. The general, one of the most powerful names in the Western Command, wasn't speaking to a technician anymore. He was speaking to the ghost who had once saved his life. Rowan looked down. You were the only one who didn't scream. Decker's throat worked, trying to find air. I never knew who it was. They told me you died. 10 minutes after the evac, they said. His voice faltered. They needed someone to die, Rowan said. It made the cleanup easier. He stood there silent. He wasn't just recalling it, he was back there. The heat, the twisted metal, the smell of scorched fabric, and then her, this woman in front of him now, pulling him out of hell. You saved me, he whispered, as if finally understanding the words. Rowan's gaze met his, and I watched the dust settle over both of us. They stood in silence, surrounded by soldiers who no longer whispered, no longer doubted. They bore witness, now, that was all. Decker spoke again, his voice quieter. All these years, you never tried to contact me. Why? I didn't know who I'd saved, Rowan said. Your helmet was off, your face was burned. You didn't say anything after the first scream. She paused. And even if I had known, what would I have said? Hi, I'm the soldier you erased? He flinched. They told me it was for national stability, Rowan continued, voice steady. That letting the truth out would jeopardize you. The quadrant. I was 28, I just buried half my unit. I said yes because I thought I owed it to someone. You owed it to yourself to survive, Decker murmured. I did, quietly, alone. Decker turned, looking at the room, the soldiers who once mocked her, now silent in the wake of the truth. He looked back at Rowan. I can't undo what was done, but maybe I can start unbearing it. Rowan studied his face. She wasn't looking for an apology. She was searching for conviction. You still have pull? She asked. He nodded. I do. And you still sign things? I do. Her voice dropped to something almost a command. Then make it count. He straightened, a man who'd been given a mission far heavier than paperwork. I will. No salute was exchanged, no official gesture, just something unspoken and true. A bond between two soldiers once deemed disposable, now standing under the weight of history and still breathing. 3 days later, the memo came. No press, no headlines, just a quiet line added to the base's daily report. Rowan M. Hale, contractor ID 43-911, granted full honorary veteran status under Article 2.7, internal citation classified. But by then, everyone already knew. The memo changed everything. It wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but its quiet presence spread through the compound like a new current. The air itself felt altered. What had once been laced with distance and silent judgment now carried something else entirely. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, respect, a kind of reverent hush. No one called her civilian anymore. That label had disappeared without anyone needing to discuss it. She no longer crossed the motor pool alone. Soldiers naturally fell into stride beside her, wordlessly forming a new kind of perimeter. Her name began reappearing on shift schedules, no longer scratched out in irritation but highlighted in quiet affirmation. Someone had even welded a nameplate to her workbench, clean, new steel, stamped with Hale, TF Crimson. She found it early one morning, didn't say a word, just ran her fingers across the cool metal and went back to calibrating a circuit board like nothing had changed. But the mess hall changed too. Luke, the youngest of the crew, approached one afternoon with 2 steaming cups and a tray balanced in his hands. He didn't hover awkwardly or stumble over his words like before, just sat across from her, calm and sure. You were right about that capacitor fix, he said, sliding over a cup. Cut the load time in half. Rowan nodded. It stabilizes better if you cross-ground the fuse junction. That was all. No speech, no handshake, just shared coffee and silent progress. Later, Granger passed by. He didn't sit, didn't speak, but left a small envelope next to her tray. Inside was a freshly rethreaded voltage meter, the exact model they'd ruined her first week on base. Restored, clean. He gave her a curt nod and walked away. Even Diaz, once the loudest voice of doubt in every room she entered, offered her a salute one morning. Sloppy, uncertain, and definitely not by the book. But it was real. The most striking moment came 2 days later in the briefing room. After a routine security update, Major General Thomas Decker paused and surveyed the young engineers, drone operators, and techs sitting before him. There are stories we don't tell, he began, his voice low but resonant. Not because they're lies, but because someone decided they were inconvenient. Silence rippled across the room. A few stiffened in their seats. But every system, Decker continued, even one as vast as this, has its ghosts. And sometimes those ghosts still walk among us, fixing what no one else can, teaching lessons no manual will ever include. He never said her name. He didn't need to. Rowan stood near the exit, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. She heard every word. That night, when the desert winds began to howl and the stars glittered above like they had something to say, Rowan sat alone at the edge of the loading dock. Her boots were off, socks dirty from the day. A battered tin cup of coffee rested in her hands, long since gone cold. A shadow approached. Keller, limping as always. Didn't expect a parade, she said without looking up. You'd hate a parade. True, Ian. He lowered himself beside her with a quiet grunt. Exhaled deeply. They know now, he murmured. Rowan gave a slow nod. Some of it. Enough, he said. She looked at him, her voice softer now. Think they'll remember? He didn't hesitate. Only the right ones will. The rest never mattered. 2 weeks later, a new group of recruits arrived, young, eager, the bright sheen of training still clinging to them like armor. Rowan leaned against the wall near the tool depot, watching them swagger too fast and laugh too loud. They carried themselves like the world had already been explained to them, like their stripes would protect them from chaos. She remembered that feeling. The blind faith that orders were answers, and loyalty was a given. One recruit dropped his toolkit, scattering fuses across the floor. The others chuckled. Rowan stepped forward and crouched, gathering the small components beside him. The boy blushed. "Thanks, ma'am," he mumbled. "You assigned to our squad?" She handed him the last fuse. "No, but I've walked your path before." He blinked. "Were you an instructor?" "No," she said. "Just someone who remembers what it's like to carry gear you're not ready for." The words hung between them, heavier than expected. He straightened, eyes a little wider. After a pause, he offered a quiet salute. Rowan returned it with barely a nod, but it was enough. Later that day, in the West Hangar, she found a young technician struggling with a broken console, caught in a snarling feedback loop. Sparks burst, frustration mounted. He cursed under his breath, trying to hold the system steady. "Mind if I try something?" Rowan asked, rolling up her sleeves. The tech moved aside without a word, the fatigue in his shoulders giving way to relief. She scanned the panel, twisted two wires with a swift flick, and the console snapped to life with a clean hum. The tech stared, dumbfounded. "What the hell?" "Sometimes it's not about force," she said. "It's about knowing where things are most likely to break." He'd remember that line for the rest of his life. Rowan didn't return to the command center after that. There was no need. Her presence didn't depend on titles or commendations. Her impact was etched in the subtle shifts. The tools left exactly as she placed them. The unspoken glances of acknowledgement. The small silences before her name was spoken. Then came Sunday. It was a routine roll call. Nothing formal, nothing mandatory. Just the base gathering as the sun lifted over the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the concrete. General Decker stood with his clipboard, issuing notes and quick updates like always. Then he cleared his throat. "One final note," he said. "Effective immediately, civilian contractor Rowan Hale will serve as senior advisor to all power systems, operations, and training." There were murmurs, a few claps, some smiles exchanged. In the back, Rowan stood with her hands folded behind her. She didn't move, didn't step forward. She never cared for titles, just the room to do the work that needed doing. That evening, as twilight spilled across the desert compound, Rowan returned to her usual bench behind the motor pool. Same cup, same boots, same solitude. Except this time, she wasn't alone. Three young soldiers approached quietly, toolboxes and notebooks in hand. They didn't ask permission to sit. They just did. Rowan glanced their way. "Lesson starts at 1900, she said, sipping from the tin. No speech, no applause. Just a woman who had seen the fire, walk through it, and come back. Not for recognition, but so no one else would have to walk it alone. Some stories don't need medals to endure. They live on in quiet leadership, in blistered hands passing down truths no training manual can hold, and in those who keep showing up, not for glory, but because they still believe in duty, even when the world forgets their name." Rowan Hale didn't return to be remembered. She came back to make sure the right ones never got forgotten.